Welcome to our channel, Trade with China. Today we are going to start a new session introducing the most prosperous Chinese international companies and their establisher stories, which is vital to future cooperations and better understanding in trades with China. Today we are going to talk about BYD, the Chinese electric car brand, and its CEO Wang. They are expanding their business map to the world. And it's quite an expansion we're seeing. We're doing a deep dive today into BYD, stands for Build Your Dreams, which is interesting in itself. A company that's really shaken things up, hasn't it? Especially in EVs.
Oh, absolutely. Shaking things up is putting it mildly. They've gone from, making basic battery cells in the mid-90s to a global auto giant.
So the big question we want to unpack is how. How did Wang Chuanfu, this technology fanatic, as some call him, pull this off?
Well, it's a fascinating mix, really. Looking at the sources, it seems to boil down to some clever tech plays, aggressive cost-cutting, sheer resilience when things got tough legally, and one huge, almost catastrophic risk that somehow paid off.
Okay, so let's trace that. Our mission here is to follow those key moments, those pivotal decisions, starting with Wang himself. Before BYD, he wasn't a businessman, right?
Not at all. He was an academic, a researcher, got his master's, became the youngest department director at the Beijing Non-Ferrous Metals Research Institute, highly respected in his field.
So a scientist, essentially. What pushed him into entrepreneurship?
The market, really. Back in the early 90s, the rechargeable battery scene was completely locked down. Japanese companies Sanyo, Toshiba, Panasonic, Sony, they had something like 90% of the market.
Wow, 90%. That sounds impossible to break into.
For most, yeah. It looked like a fortress. But Wang saw an opportunity, not a barrier, especially with the cost of batteries back then.
Ah, right. You mentioned the big brother phones, those big, clunky early cell phones.
Exactly.
Oh.
And if you needed a new battery for one, it could cost, get this, over 500 RMB.
500 RMB in the mid-90s. That was a lot of money.
A huge amount. For an average worker, that could be weeks of salary just for a battery. Wang saw that price, saw the demand, and decided, I can do better.
So that was the trigger.
Seems like it. He resigned from his research post in '95, borrowed, sources say, 2.5 million RMB.
Okay.
And his relative, Liu Shangyang, apparently kicked in another 3 million. With that, he founded BYD down in Shenzhen.
And his first move wasn't even consumer tech, was it?
No, very smart. He targeted the OEM market, original equipment manufacturers, making the core nickel-cadmium batteries for other companies, aiming straight at the Japanese dominance, but from underneath, on cost.
Which leads us to their first big strategy, right? This innovative manufacturing approach.
Yes, the first, maybe the most crucial founding story. How to achieve low-cost, high-performance against giants with way more capital. They couldn't just buy the same expensive automated lines.
So they came up with the small race and rifle mode. What does that actually mean in practice?
It sounds a bit rustic, but it was brilliant. Instead of a multi-million RMB fully automated Japanese line, Wang designed semi-manual, semi-automated lines.
Semi-manual, so using more people.
Precisely. Leveraging China's lower labor costs at the time. They used skilled human workers for tasks that Japanese factories used expensive dedicated robots for. Think precise hand assembly combined with some automation.
And the cost difference was significant.
Absolutely staggering. Wang's line, apparently costing just over 1 million RMB, could churn out 3,000 to 4,000 batteries a day. A comparable Japanese line cost tens of millions.
That translates into a massive price advantage.
Crushing. Around 40% cheaper than the competition right out of the gate.
And the market noticed.
Immediately. It wasn't just sustainable, it was disruptive.
Yeah.
By 96, they're supplying Lucent. By 98, Nico, the big electric toy maker.
Okay.
And the real coup, by 2000, they reportedly had 30–40% of Motorola's battery orders. Think about that. Motorola.
Wow. So in just 5 years.
5 years. They went from zero to the world's second largest battery supplier. And some of those Japanese giants, they started posting losses in that segment.
Okay, that kind of rapid success must have drawn some unwanted attention.
You bet it did.
Yeah.
Which brings us neatly to the second story, the patent wars. You don't disrupt a multi-billion-dollar industry controlled by established players without facing some serious pushback.
Right. The lawsuits started flying.
They did. In 2002, Sanyo sued BYD in the US over lithium-ion patents. Then, just a year later, Sony sued them in Japan.
These weren't minor skirmishes, I imagine.
No, these were potentially company-killing lawsuits, designed to either bleed them dry through legal costs or shut them down entirely.
But Wang didn't back down.
Not his style, it seems. BYD fought back. They countersued Sanyo. And against Sony in Japan, they went on the offensive, actually challenging the validity of Sony's core patents. A very bold move.
Challenging Sony's patents in Japan, that takes guts.
It does. And it worked. BYD actually won. The Japanese Patent Office, and later the High Court, invalidated one of Sony's key patents.
That's huge. What did that signal to the market?
It signaled that BYD wasn't just a low-cost manufacturer. They had the technical chops and the legal muscle to compete on the global stage head-to-head with the biggest names. They couldn't just be bullied out of the market.
Okay, so they've conquered batteries, fought off legal challenges, but Wang wasn't done. You mentioned he saw a ceiling in the battery market.
Yeah, even as a world-class battery kingdom, as some called it, he felt the growth potential was topping out. He needed a bigger pond to play in.
And that led to the pivot into cars.
The pivot, a hugely controversial decision in 2003. BYD acquired Chuanfu Automobile Company, paid about 270 million Hong Kong dollars for a 77% stake. Just like that, the battery maker was now in the car business.
How did that go down internally and with investors?
Badly. Very badly initially. Reports say his entire management team was against it. Too risky, too far from their core competency. And investors, they panicked.
What happened to the stock?
It tanked. Dropped from 18 Hong Kong dollars to under 14.50 in just 2 days. Wiped out something like 2.7 billion Hong Kong dollars in market value. Just evaporated.
Ouch. How did Wang justify this gamble to everyone freaking out?
His framing was key. He told skeptical investors, look, making a car is basically just manufacturing a large battery. He saw it as a natural extension, a massive new application for their battery technology and manufacturing know-how.
So the vision was electric cars, even back in 2003.
Absolutely. Long before EVs were mainstream, that was his endgame. He wasn't just buying a traditional car company, he was buying a platform for future electric mobility.
But getting into car manufacturing isn't easy. Did it work straight away?
No, definitely not. And that leads into our third story, which involves a pretty painful and expensive failure.
The learning curve. What happened?
Their first attempt at designing their own car, internally called the 316, was a disaster. They spent over 100 million RMB on molds from a Japanese company.
Okay, a big investment.
Huge. But when the car was ready, distributors basically said, nope, we can't sell this. It was deemed unmarketable. The whole project had to be scrapped.
100 million RMB down the drain. That must have been a tough pill to swallow after the investor panic.
A very expensive tuition fee, as the sources put it. But it taught Wang a crucial lesson.
Which was?
Control.
Yeah.
Just like with batteries, they needed to control the whole process. Relying on external supplier for critical things like molds was too slow, too expensive, and too risky.
So vertical integration again.
Exactly. That failure directly led to BYD acquiring Beijing Jiqi Automotive Mold Company in 2003. They built their own internal mold-making capability.
And that made the difference.
It was transformative. They achieved, quote, Japanese quality at Chinese cost in mold making. More importantly, it meant they could design, test, and produce new car models much, much faster and cheaper than competitors relying on outside suppliers.
Control the tooling, control the speed, and cost.
You got it. And that internal capability paved the way for their first big automotive hit.
The F3.
The BYD F3 launched in 2005. It became a massive success in China, won the Triple Crown, highest production, sales growth, and volume in its class. That car really proved Wang's risky pivot into autos wasn't crazy after all.
Okay, so the car venture's validated, but the end goal was always electric, right?
Always.
Yeah.
Wang had this long-term plan, apparently called the 3-3-3 strategy. 9 years, broken into 3 phases, with the final phase focused squarely on leading with new EV technology.
And they made progress there early on.
Quite early, yes. They launched the F3DM, the world's first mass-produced plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, arguably. Its electric range was significantly better than early competitors like the Chevy Volt.
And Wang was confident about their edge.
Extremely. He publicly claimed BYD's battery cost advantage gave him a 20-year lead over Japanese rivals in the auto sector. A bold claim, but it shows his focus.
That kind of technological claim must have turned some heads globally.
It certainly turned one very important head. In 2008, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway invested $230 million for a 10% stake in BYD.
Buffett. But he famously avoided tech stocks, didn't he?
Usually, yes. That's what made it such a massive endorsement. It wasn't just the money, it was the credibility. It signaled to the world that BYD was a serious player and definitely helped their global expansion plans, especially into the U.S.
And they keep growing. You mentioned another strategy they use today, the 3 mores and 2 fasts.
Right. It's about supporting their dealers and staying agile. The 3 mores. More products for dealers to sell, more advertising support, and more financial support.
Okay, empowering the sales channel.
Exactly. And the 2 fasts. Fast market adjustment, meaning quickly responding to changing tastes or competitor moves, and fast return on investment for the dealers. Keep things moving quickly.
It sounds like a system built for speed and adaptation, much like their manufacturing.
Very much so. It allows them to react much faster than many larger, more established global automakers.
So wrapping this up, we've seen BYD's journey under Wang Chuanfu, driven by, well, technical insight, relentless cost innovation, vertical integration, and navigating some serious challenges, from batteries to global auto leader.
It really is a remarkable story. And maybe the final thought for you listening is something Wang Chuanfu himself talked about, this idea of technological fear.
Technological fear.
Yeah, he argued that often established players use the idea of complex technology as a weapon, a scare tactic, to deter newcomers. They make it seem like an insurmountable barrier.
Like that initial 90% Japanese dominance in batteries.
Exactly. But BYD's story suggests that sometimes that barrier is thinner than it looks like a sheet of window paper, as Wang put it. It can be broken not necessarily by outspending, but by outthinking, by innovating on process and leveraging resources differently. They proved it could be done.
The powerful lesson in challenging the status quo. Your comments really encourage us to realize our video value and encourage us to update more useful information. If you like this kind of content, please press LIKE and subscribe us, not to miss the possibility to understand and make money in trades with China.